Yes, New Orleans Saints quarterback Jameis Winston did throw 3 interceptions against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but the concerns around the New Orleans Saints are much bigger than just 3 plays. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Ross Jackson, host of the Locked On Saints podcast. You can always follow me on Twitter at RossJacksonNola. Thank you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we're free and available on all podcast apps here on YouTube as well, where we are live. Once again, I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at RossJacksonNola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media. You can find me over at CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is presented by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projections, you can win up to 10 times your entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here for another live episode of Locked On Saints. I appreciate y'all very much for being here. Go ahead and drop those your team every days in the chat if you're here watching live. I see you, Carla, already with the your team every day. I see a whole bunch of people actually coming through with it, so I appreciate y'all. Brittany as well. Thank you, Brittany, for being here. I appreciate y'all very much for joining us for this live episode. Here's what we're going to be breaking down today. A lot's going to be made of the 3 interception game by Jameis Winston. But the fact of the matter is that when it comes to the New Orleans Saints, they're not going to have the same type of overreaction. So while they're over there, right, talking about 3 interceptions, we're going to be here talking about the things that actually went wrong for the New Orleans Saints and what all needs to be addressed, because it's not as simple as just 3 moments. Some stuff the New Orleans Saints had control over, other stuff they simply didn't have control over, questionable calls, things like that. Let's do our best to break it all down. But the bottom line here when it comes to the Jameis Winston conversation, which is already kind of the biggest conversation that's being had around all of this, is that I'm seeing people that are either overreacting or underreacting, right? And we see this all the time. Trevor Sikkema and I kind of talked about this with the Jarvis Landry's career trajectory. People said Jarvis is a top 15 wide receiver. Then people tried to top that and say he's a top 10 wide receiver. And then people had to have takes that top that with him being a top 5 wide receiver. And then because they moved up that far, you had to also have all of the people in the media circus that were saying things like, he's not even a top 50 receiver. And so you have that's how you create these sort of just big time opposite, people on opposite sides of the spectrum and all that. These diametrically opposed takes. That's the word that I was looking for. Similarly, you're seeing that with Jameis Winston, right? I mean, everyone is going to talk about, when Jameis Winston throws an interception, they're going to talk about the 30 interception season. You saw Devin White's post-game interview after the Saints lost to the Bucs yesterday at home saying, we know who Jameis Winston is. We knew he was going to give us the ball. He threw 30 interceptions, blah, blah, blah. The issue here is that anytime a quarterback throws 3 interceptions, you're probably going to lose that game. Matt Ryan threw 3 interceptions yesterday. He's thrown 4 on the season. He and the Indianapolis Colts were shut out by the team that everyone projected to be at the bottom of their division yesterday, the Jacksonville Jaguars. When you throw away 3 interceptions, it's a bad thing. So is Jameis Winston throwing 3 interceptions bad? Yes. But it's just as bad as any quarterback throwing 3 interceptions. What oftentimes happens is that people will take that and then they'll kind of reclassify it as, well, now he's on pace to throw 30 interceptions again if he throws 3 interceptions for the rest of the season, which, let's just be real, that's not going to happen, right? If he throws 3 interceptions every game the rest of the season. which he'd be on par at that in that case for well beyond 30 interceptions. But you understand what I'm saying. People will kind of overinflate that. The other side of it, though, is that people will respond to that by saying, no. Jameis Winston throwing 3 interceptions is not a big deal, and that we shouldn't pay attention to it, and that you're only talking about it because he threw 30 interceptions one time and things like that. That's also not correct, right? So you're kind of like in this place of people on these very kind of wide sides, or too far to one side, too far to the other side, where we know how it goes, right? The truth is always somewhere in the middle. And so for the Jameis Winston conversation here, what I'll say is this. Jameis Winston throwing 3 interceptions is not good. Jameis Winston taking big plays over the right plays, not good. The interception that went downfield, the first interception, Michael Thomas was wide open underneath, maybe would have picked up 5 or 6 yards probably, but then you had another down to try to take advantage of a manageable 3rd and short. So you have to make better decisions than that, right? And we've seen Jameis make better decisions than that in the past. I don't know if maybe this was a situation to where the moment was too big, or the emotion was there, or whatever it is, right? But regardless, you're not going to be able to do that. And so when you have Chris Olave being targeted downfield and 13 targets going to Chris Olave, and you've got 9 targets going to Michael Thomas, if you flip that, you probably have a better game, right? You flip that, you target Michael Thomas on some of those times where you tried to go deep, you're probably picking up more yardage. You have a better completion percentage. Michael Thomas is certainly having a better day. And as I looked through all the film, there's a lot of times where Michael Thomas is open. Like, Michael Thomas is still really good, y'all. Like, maybe this past game wasn't his best showing because he wasn't targeted as much, not necessarily because of anything else. He still had 6 catches for 65 yards. And of course, the big touchdown that he caught in between like 2 defenders, and everything. But you target Michael Thomas 4 more times in this game, maybe that makes a difference of 1 or potentially even 2 of those interceptions. So it's just things like that. Like, it's not even the interceptions for me. It's the making the right decision as opposed to the big decision. So there's a lot of people saying things like, okay, well, the Saints should go to Andy Dalton now and things like that. And it's okay for media to overreact. It's okay and it's fun for like those types of things, but the team's not going to overreact, right? Like, they're going to ride things forward. They're going to see what this looks like moving forward and everything like that. So the way that I look at it is, it's still Jameis Winston's show. It's just that wasn't a good game yesterday, and both things can be true. So we'll see how things adjust moving forward. But one thing that would be able to save the New Orleans Saints season effectively is being able to find an identity on offense so that they can avoid what Carla just talked about in the chat, which is what has been a sluggish offense for 7 of 8 quarters so far throughout this season. Now, there's a way to do that, and you already started to see glimpses of it yesterday. New Orleans Saints offensive line struggled in pass protection. It's been like 10 sacks over the course of the past 2 games, but in the run game, they were much improved in week 2. But the New Orleans Saints didn't get the opportunity to take advantage of it the way that they could if they had one thing different in their lineup. I'll tell you what the difference is and could be as early as next week as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Before we get to that, though, I want to talk to you about our friends over at Prize Picks. Mentioned them before at the beginning of the show. If you took the world's greatest minds, Raven from That's So Raven, George Washington Carver, and let's say Benjamin Franklin, I guess, Thomas Edison maybe, and you put all those people in a room together and you said, come up with the best version of fantasy football, the greatest minds in our time, which, yes, includes Raven Simone. No, not Raven Simone, but Raven from That's So Raven, the character. You're going to get Prize Picks. No, I'm just kidding. But honestly, if you put all the greatest minds in the world and said create fantasy football, you're going to get Prize Picks. I love the way that Prize Picks works. You pick 2 to 5 players, then all you have to do is pick whether or not they're going to score more or less, higher or lower than their Prize Picks projection. So for instance, going into this weekend, there was a more or less set for Jameis Winston's passing yardage. There was one for Michael Thomas's receiving yardage, Tom Brady's passing yardage. So let's say you picked those 3. Let's say you went, and you went 3 of 3 on that. You could win. Your total's back. That's how you win, right? You don't have to go up there and play against people that have knowledge and that, are doing all the spreadsheets and all the other stuff. It's just you versus a projection. That's it. And all you have to do is think about if they're going to go more or less than that. It's that simple. So you download the PrizePicks app today, or you can go to prizepicks.com and you can sign up to play daily fantasy sports the way that it should be. First-time users will receive a 100% instant deposit match of up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will match that with $100. If you deposit $50, then they'll give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up today for an instant deposit match of up to $100 at prizepicks.com. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. The New Orleans Saints had a really important improvement that I think is worth highlighting, particularly over on the offensive side, because the New Orleans Saints could establish their identity through this improvement. And it's simple. They just need one more ingredient, and that ingredient was missing this past weekend. Hopefully, we'll be back sooner rather than later. And for me, that is Alvin Kamara. The New Orleans Saints should be able to build their identity moving forward off of their run game if the New Orleans Saints offensive line can continue to do what it did in the run game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Sunday. Mark Ingram had the big fumble. That kind of was a big turning point. Dennis Allen, New Orleans Saints head coach, called it a game changer. And it absolutely was, right? You had the first drive of the game, 4 first downs for the New Orleans Saints offense to kick a field goal. After that, the next 5 or 6 drives, they combined for only 4 first downs. Mark Ingram's run that led to the fumble was about to be their 5th first down of that drive at the end of the third quarter. So things started to really get going because of the run game. But then you had the fumble. Mark Ingram has now turned the ball over by fumbling two times in as many weeks, right? Once in each of the last 2 weeks. And that becomes such a big part of where this game kind of went sideways. It was a big turning point. Then you add in the big fight. You add in the very questionable Bradley Roby, not even questionable, honestly, just ridiculous, right? Bradley Roby, unnecessary roughness, but didn't actually touch the receiver call. I don't understand that. I didn't understand the need to eject Marshawn Lattimore, but they always go after the responder, never the aggressor. As you can see down in the scroller, if you're watching on YouTube, the NFL is going to look into all that and see if there's further discipline. I think very likely Mike Evans ends up with another suspension off of that. But anyway, I digress, right? Those are all things that they can't control. That's just referees making bad calls, making bad decisions, players getting mad, players taking cheap shots, Tom Brady 40 yards down the field complaining to a referee. Like, those are things the New Orleans Saints can't control. However, 12 men on the field you can control, right? When it comes to like the special teams penalties and things like that. So you have to get those things cleaned up. But the easy thing to look at and pinpoint for the New Orleans Saints is the run game. And the Saints produced extremely well in the run game during this game. They only ran 20 times, but they averaged 5.1 yards per carry, over 100 rushing yards as a team. Several 10+, 9+, 8+ runs. And the Saints on first and second down have been kind of inefficient over the course of the first 2 games. But on Sunday, when they ran the ball on first down, they were looking much better. So if you can win and get ahead of the sticks, or you can get ahead of your game plan on first and second downs, it makes your third downs more manageable, things like that. So for the Saints, they should be able to build their identity off of their run game once they get Alvin Kamara back. Mark Ingram did a great job yesterday, but that fumble's big, right? I mean, and he talked about it as well. Like, his number one job is to protect the football. He told us that in the locker room. Dennis Allen told us after the game that was a game changer for them, that it can't happen, all of that. So for what the New Orleans Saints were able to do and had control over, with the exception of the fumble, which of course you're taking away the most important play of the game almost in that circumstance. But in that situation, you end up having a situation to where like you were able to produce in the run game a week after not being able to produce in the run game at all. Now you have sort of this missing piece of Alvin Kamara that wasn't there, all of that. And I see somebody already in the chat saying that the Saints turned the ball over 5 times, don't use the refs as an excuse. There's a difference between using the refs as an excuse and also like acknowledging the talking point, right? Like, you can talk about both things. Both things are true. The New Orleans Saints had some bad calls that went their way. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers had some bad calls that went their way. New Orleans Saints also gave up 6 sacks and then also had 5 turnovers. both things can be true. So it's not necessarily using anything as an excuse. There's no excuses. There's only the result. And the result was a loss. And there were a lot of different reasons for that loss. But if the Saints are able to build their identity a little bit more off of this run game once they get Alvin Kamara back, which brings me back to the original point, Mike, then you end up in a situation, I'm just messing with you, but you end up in a situation there to where you're able to avoid some of the issues that you had. You're extending drives. You're not putting the ball in harm's way by throwing it 40 times and having to kind of play from behind. You're controlling the game a little bit more. You're controlling the clock a little bit more. And y'all, some of the holes that were available for these running backs were massive. And you have to imagine that Alvin Kamara could have done more with them than the stable of running backs that the Saints had to use to kind of supplement the loss of Alvin Kamara. Not to say that those running backs and Taysom Hill didn't do anything with them. They did, right? They had several 10-plus yard runs, all of those things, like I mentioned. But what you get with Alvin Kamara in those situations are breakaway plays, touchdowns, explosive runs, things like that. Alvin Kamara is that guy. So that's the big piece to all of it. So those that ends up to me being the easiest sort of adjustment that you can make over on the offensive side, is continuing to progress in the run game, which allows you to kind of calm things down a little bit. The New Orleans Saints felt more frantic on Sunday when they fell behind to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers than the other day than last week against the Atlanta Falcons, And that ends up being such a huge element of this, is can you be calm and can you be in a situation to where you're able to kind of control your environment a little bit more? That felt a little bit more, even though it wasn't a 16-point lead, at a certain point, you still were in a situation to where you feel much more like the Saints had a larger, sort of more insurmountable hill to climb than even the 16-point deficit that they faced against Atlanta. So slowing things down, controlling the game a little bit more early, building your identity off of the run game can help you with those things and being a little bit more like calm, cool, calculated, stuff like that. So that when things do happen that you can't control, you can control what happens next. That's where the New Orleans Saints kind of fell short a little bit against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers yesterday. Okay, coming up next, bright spots over on the defensive side. Lots of good things coming from there. Yes, there was a 20-plus yard touchdown given up, but outside of that, this New Orleans Saints defense, particularly in the run game, looked much improved from last week. Why is that important? And we'll talk about as well the dynamic duo of Demario Davis and Pete Werner, because they were awesome yesterday. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode and wrap up today's episode of Locked on Saints. Before we get to that, though, I want to tell you about our friends over at Turo. Doing a lot of traveling, going to games, things like that. Atlanta, Carolina. Next week, I'll be in London. And there's only one place that I trust when it comes to getting a vehicle, and it's Turo, because I don't want to mess with the usual rental car services and things like that. I want to get exactly what it is that I want. I want to get that bang for my buck, right? So if I need an economy car that just gets me from point A to point B, which is usually what I do in like the cities and stuff like that I go to, then I can use Turo and get exactly that. But if I want something that's a little bit more like, hey, we're going to, be lots of hills and things like that, and I want to make sure that I get a Jeep or something more substantial, I can use Turo and get exactly what I need. And I don't have to do the whole like waiting in line and all this other stuff. Everything already comes with covered with liability insurance. And most of the hosts at Turo will also bring your car to you, which is super cool. So just gives you a little bit more control. Something New Orleans Saints could have used yesterday. Gives you the opportunity to make better, selections, things like that. And then convenience as well. So ditch the rental cars, find your ride over at Turo, Turo.com today. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked on Saints with a good note here, right? There's still some positives to take away from this game. The run game on the offensive side was much improved. You got to kind of question a little bit the decision-making, both in terms of play calling as well as execution when it came to the passing game. But the next piece then becomes what you're looking at over on the other side of the ball. The New Orleans Saints held Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to 3 points for 3 quarters. And in fact, really held the Tampa Bay Buccaneers team as a whole, or offense as a whole, to 13 points over the course of 4 quarters. The pick 6 was the additional 7 points. So the defense, I thought, played really, really well. And so for me, looking at where you find sort of these bright spots over in the defense starts with where you saw improvement yesterday. And that, for me, is the run game. The run game was outstanding for the New Orleans Saints on the defensive side. Leonard Fournette tore apart the Dallas Cowboys last week on the ground. He had a long of 13 in this game, and that was the longest run that the New Orleans Saints gave up. They held and he had a total of only 65 rushing yards on 24 carries is the thing. Now, after a little while, you're trying to run the clock out, things like that. You have the lead. I get that. But the Saints went from, watching a Leonard Fournette tear apart the Dallas Cowboys to allowing only 2.7 yards per carry to the guy. That's really, really good. Beyond that, on the 30 times that Tampa rushed in this game, the New Orleans Saints allowed only 2.4 yards per carry as well. So you're seeing sort of these individual improvements, right? The run game over on the offensive side, the run game on the defensive side, coverage was really good across the board throughout this game. I'll break down the touchdown that PJ Williams surrendered to Brashad Perryman on Wednesday's episode, our usual Film Watch Wednesday. But outside of that, the Saints defense, you can see all of the little improvements. But the biggest kind of takeaway for me when it comes to the New Orleans Saints defense is just how good their second level is. And there's an asterisk here because you're concerned probably about depth. And that makes sense, right? You're concerned about depth across any position, across any NFL team. But for the Saints, when it comes to Demario Davis and Pete Werner, they good, y'all. Like, they really, really good. I mean, these guys were all over the field in this one. Pete Werner with 8 combined tackles, Demario Davis with 6 combined tackles. Pete Werner just came off of a 13 tackle game last week where he led the team in tackles. He was second this week because Shai Tuttle actually led the team in tackles this week with 9. He also had a half sack along with David Onyemata, the only sack of the New Orleans Saints season so far. So 2 games down, only 1 sack by the New Orleans Saints defensive line. So that's a place where you're still looking to see the Saints get a little bit better. The Bucs were down to their 3rd string left tackle at one point. And so you should be able to get pressure. You should be able to get after Tom Brady, but he just gets the ball out so quickly, all of these other things, but you didn't really get the same level of pressure that you'd like. But from the run game perspective, the New Orleans Saints did a really good job. Demario Davis, Pete Werner, though, outstanding, this duo. And you're starting to get it now, right? Like, you're starting to see it a bunch. The big thing is, real quick, sorry, I see a question that I think is important. Carla is asking about the Olave fumble. Ground can or can't cause a fumble. The ground can cause a fumble if you're untouched. So if you just fall to the ground, like if you catch it, you establish possession, you fall to the ground, you hit the ground, and then the ball pops out, it's going to be a fumble. But if someone touches you on the way down, then you're down. So that's all that it is. It's just about the touch and stuff like that. But Demario Davis and Pete Werner were really outstanding in yesterday's game. You saw Pete Werner making plays in the passing game, in the run game. You saw him making plays sideline to sideline, in the box, on the sideline, up the seam. You saw him in coverage. You saw him breaking up passes. I mean, you saw all of that. Demario Davis getting in the backfield again, making big stops in the run game, scraping super well. Scraping just meaning that you're moving laterally from one side to the other of the field. It's part of that sideline to sideline ability. It's not necessarily going full send from one side to the other. It's about understanding, okay, what's the play flow? How do I get from where I am to where the ball is going? And Demario Davis does that better than just about any linebacker in the NFL. He's one of the best linebackers in the NFL. So with all of that, you look at where the Saints are and where the Saints were before the season with that conversation around should they bring back Quan Alexander or not? Are they choosing Pete Werner over Quan Alexander? You're starting to see it all come to fruition now. Now, Pete Werner has to stay healthy, right? He had the groin injury that kept him out at the beginning of training camp, that knocked him out after a little bit of training camp, but he's looked outstanding. He made a huge play last week with punching the ball out on Olamide Zaccheaus after the big catch. It was like 22-yard catch in the middle of the field, caught up peanut punch, right? The top-down sort of punch out there. You also had him, come up with a couple of big plays where he either affected the pass catcher at the catch point or knocked the ball away at the catch point. And so those guys in the middle of the field continue to bring a lot of juice. And I think that helps you a ton. Things you're going to be watching going into next week over on the defensive side is Marcus May's health. He had a wrist injury, so we'll see what happens there. I don't think Marshawn Lattimore is going to get suspended. I would be surprised if he got suspended. The NFL is kind of doing a look at everything that happened. Bruce Arians was mouthing off on the sideline. Tom Brady was mouthing off. Leonard Fournette instigated the whole thing. Mike Evans with another cheap shot on Marshawn Lattimore, all of that. Like, I think that those guys end up seeing a bit of, seeing some potential discipline. But I don't know that I don't think Marshawn Lattimore deserves discipline to that extent of a suspension or anything like that. But you are going to be kind of watching the secondary over the course of this week to kind of see what gets impacted, who gets impacted where, things like that. that I think is maybe a place where you don't really have a lot of question marks at the moment, but if you start getting into depth, then maybe you start to ask those question marks. I thought Alontae Taylor came in and did a good job when he came in. They didn't really go after him because he didn't give anyone anything to go after. I mean, usually you have a guy go out like Marshawn Lattimore, somebody immediately step into the role, and then bam, they're going to go after him. They didn't go after Alontae Taylor because his coverage was actually really good. So that's good. It's good to see that from Alontae Taylor. So the next thing is kind of like, can you get pressure on the opposing quarterbacks? That's going to be big against Carolina. And then can you build your identity around your run game, but then be able to exit and help that, make that so that, see, this is why, like live shows, I can edit this stuff. Live shows, I can't edit this stuff. Can you build and establish your run game to the point to where you can emphasize or build up to your passing game, right? Set your passing game up with your run game and the success that you're having on the ground. Those are kind of the big things that you're going to be looking for over the course of, how they come out of this Bucs loss and into the Carolina Panthers game next weekend, which I'll be in Carolina. We'll have you covered for all of that. The other thing is just Jameis Winston's injury. 4 fractures in his back. I don't know. They said that there's like no concern about further injury. I don't understand that, but I'm also not a doctor. So we'll see. But if that is something that's going to cause issues moving forward, then certainly something to watch there. I don't know how much that impacted his willingness to run yesterday, but there were a couple of times where he could have run for first downs, extended some drives, things like that. I don't know if that was the back or if that was just the mentality of like what happened to him the last time that he was in the Superdome and tried to run against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, right? So I get all of that. So we'll see. We'll see. I think that the Saints can have a bounce back week next week, but they have some steps to take to get there. We'll continue to break down those steps in tomorrow's episode. We'll do a little bit more of a deeper dive as we always do with the analytics. We'll take a look at how the types of routes that Michael Thomas ran, some opportunities missed in the passing game that the Saints should be able to pick up on going into week 3 against Carolina. We'll also take a look at just how much push that offensive line got for New Orleans in the run game. So the offense is kind of where we're really going to focus in tomorrow's episode. Wednesday, we're going to go into film watch. I'll tell you why Brashad Perryman was open on the touchdown. You can see it. You can see it develop, and it was a really good play design by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Not a lot you can take away from them. There's also, though, a really good play design from Pete Carmichael and the New Orleans Saints that that they called on a third down that I think is a look you're going to continue to see for the rest of the season. So you'll want to tune in to figure all of that stuff out with me on Wednesday. I appreciate y'all so much for being here with us for another episode. I'll tell you all the plans for London this week too, as we continue to move forward, but so much going on. Thanks for joining us for a live episode, kind of a chill episode, just kind of like talking and breaking things down, but we'll get into the more in-depth analytics, stats, film watch stuff over the rest of the week. But I appreciate y'all very, very much. Much love to you all. Don't forget, that we're always here for you for your first listen of the day. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. Everything you need around the NFL, less than 30 minutes, with former NFL scout former NFL scout Matt Williamson and your NFL analyst Brian Peacock. I started to say Pilliamson. Don't know how I did that. But anyway, appreciate y'all as always, making me a part of your day, a part of your routine, saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And big shout out to Joe and Tony. Such a pleasure to meet y'all yesterday. And a big shout out to everybody that took the time to say hi. If you need anything else around these episodes or your New Orleans Saints, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.